So over the past year, many of us have experienced extended remote working for the first time. And whether you're looking forward to the prospect of getting back to the office or not, how office life might be different post the pandemic is a question that you'll no doubt have considered. Joining us today is Will Cowell de Gruchy, founder and CEO of Infogrid, an organisation that believes technology might be able to help offer an answer to that question. I'm Matt Taylor, a partner in the UK real estate team and head of UK Proptech here at Clifford Chance. And together with my colleague James Law, a senior associate in our real estate team, we'll be discussing with Will how property technology like Infogrid's can support a safe return to the office. So Will, thanks for joining first of all. One thing that might be worth starting with is we find it kind of fascinating how Infogrid's technology works and the way you help building owners and occupiers kind of deliver on the smart building promise. For those who don't know about Infogrid, do you want to just give us kind of a quick summary of what your firm does?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Matt, and a real pleasure to be here today, and a fascinating topic really close to our hearts. So in a nutshell, Infogrid is a company that exists to help our clients capture data where it's not currently existent and use it to solve real-world problems. So there's a real pantheon of those, predominantly aimed at estates, facilities, premises management, and then also ESG, but firmly in the middle of that entire suite is office and office experience. So the way we do this is a combination of IoT sensors and machine learning at the cloud level. And before I get a little bit more into it, actually useful to kind of rewind to why the company got going, because it kind of informs what we're doing and why going forward. So previous to founding Infogrid, I actually worked as a commercial due diligence consultant for private equity deals. So I was physically visiting a lot of different businesses and assessing their operations in person. And what I noticed really quickly was how far behind most operators of physical assets were in the use of good quality data, both real-time and historic, to optimize their decision-making. And this was really surprising to me, given that the Internet of Things is not new. It's been around for decades. And we now live in an era of omnipresent connectivity, 3, 4, 5G, various other protocols, hyper-powerful cloud computing, miniaturized devices. So for me, the big question was why is IoT and the data that you can gather from it in the built environment not more prevalent? In the context that real estate is the largest asset class in the world. It's where we spend 90% of our time as humans. And it's also responsible for 28% of global emissions when you talk about the operation, and even more when you talk about construction. I just heard such a remarkably consistent answer. They said, well, it's either too complicated, too expensive, or usually it's both of those things. There was this perception that IoT wasn't scalable and a massive inertia around doing anything. Broadly speaking, well, we've got the clipboard and the clipboard kind of always worked, so why don't we stick with that? And that comes right back to the office thing. Again, workplace occupancy studies are not new, but they used to just involve a bunch of people walking around an office and recording on a clipboard where people were sat during the day. So that was the background to how Infogrid got going. And the reason that we applied the machine learning approach we do is because right at the beginning of the company's journey, I realized that you would need two components to this. You would need a B2B software component for the interpretation and use of data to get real-world outcomes, solution part. But most companies would not have enough data to feed without some kind of physical component being added as well. This is why I nearly despaired, because what I found was a lot of products in the market were very over-engineered, very expensive, very, very difficult to set up. They maybe required drilling, wiring, shutting down of buildings for a day or two. And that just wasn't going to work for the vast majority of the clients. So we've taken a more fundamentally different approach at Infogrid, which is working with really basic sensors. And they are super simple and tiny. So, I'm talking about something that looks like this, 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters by 2 millimeters, literally peel and stick. And then applying machine learning to the relatively simple data sets that come from them. So that's things like temperature or capacitance, and turning that into something that's actually useful for an end client. So that's a sort of quick counter through what we do and why we're doing it. And we definitely see that the time is now, and that companies around the world are suddenly waking up to the importance of this data, and particularly the importance in the workplace in a post-COVID environment.
So, Will, obviously the focus of this talk is on how PropTech can be used in the short to mid-term to meet the changing face of the office environment. We see the office as a vital space for collaboration, social interaction, developing culture, and training for employees. How do you think companies like Infogrid can enhance the offices of the future?
Yeah, so look, I think you're absolutely right. And a year into lockdowns around the world, I think some of the novelty of exclusively home working and next to no in-person human interaction has worn off. And I don't think we'll probably see globally a complete return for every single company doing every single day in the office. I think the future holds a lot more flexibility around the use of space. So this may be that you're physically coming to the office, but it's 3 or 4 days a week. And then the way that you're using that space when you are there will change, and your expectations around particularly the sort of health and well-being elements of those buildings will be changed. And we're seeing this kind of come across in conversations from, big FTSE 100, S&P 500 companies through service providers and many others in between. The way to unlock this new model most effectively is the use of data. So, for example, you will almost certainly see a shift to the more flexible use of space, which may include a bit more collaborative space, a bit more hot desking, and also people coming in by team or by group on certain days of the week and not others. If you're properly understanding how your space is being used and how the various kind of colleagues that you have want to use it, then you can design it better for not only that and those kind of collaborative pieces that you're talking about, but also kind of environmental and ESG concerns. So a simple example of this would be accurately understanding occupancy. So not only how many people are coming to the building, but what times of day, which days of the week, which parts of the building they use, when are you experiencing congestion, and so forth. And then making decisions that are informed based upon that. So, okay, do we find that people always tend to gravitate towards 1 or 2 areas of the building? And if so, why is that? And can we try and replicate those conditions elsewhere? We find that on a Monday or a Friday, we're consistently below 50% occupancy. So we can actually shut down a number of floors and save on cleaning cost, on energy waste, and pull people together into a more collaborative environment. But whilst we're doing it, how do we ensure that we don't overcrowd that space, that we don't have a degradation in, say, air quality that might lead to conditions that are more conducive to the spread of a virus? I think hitherto, people have just had a bit of a sort of finger in the wind approach to this. There certainly have been, even pre-COVID, trailblazing companies that look aggressively at this. But I think it's certainly moved now from a nice to have to a must have for most businesses. And it all begins with data. It doesn't end with data, and this is a really important thing about technology. For example, I use this a lot with Infogrid. There's a tool we provide to a lot of our office-based clients, which is basically what we would call one-touch ticketing or cleaning on demand. Right? So you have a little tiny button, something like this, and that could be on your photocopier, that could be on your coffee machine, that could be in a meeting room. And then you press that to say photocopy is jammed, or coffee machine's out of beans, or I need help with the AV equipment in this meeting room. That's fantastic enabling technology, which saves somebody having to make a phone call or scan a QR code or something that data tells us they just won't do. You still need someone to respond to that. Otherwise, you still need a human in the space that picks up that signal and goes and does something about it. And otherwise, people will lose faith in the technology. So it's definitely an interplay between humans in the space and kind of human intuition and the capture and use of real-time data. But it's definitely become a kind of fundamental pillar to that return.
It's quite interesting kind of what you're saying there, because actually what you often hear all this talk about how data is critical for real estate and buildings, you describe buildings as data black holes and things like that. Well, what you've kind of given there are some real examples of actually how data can be really used for the benefit of building, but both landlords, occupiers, tenants, that sort of thing. It's quite an interesting thing to see. One thing I just want to touch on, something you picked up earlier, which is how kind of simple it can be to install some of these sensors. Because I think in the discussions around what's happening in the office market, one thing that's been said is there might be a sort of two-tier market between the best buildings, which are high tech, constructed, brand new, which will kind of be still really popular, and perhaps older stock that is not as well configured.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think kind of technology like this can actually help bridge some of that? Because I think otherwise, you end up with a kind of 10% of the market's great, but 90% is in real trouble.
Absolutely. I mean, the short answer is yes, and I'll elaborate on that in a minute. I think your point is a fantastic one. So within Infogrid, we work with, broadly speaking, two tiers of clients. One is the operators of space, and so that may be that the company owns and operates the space. It may be that they're leasing it from somebody else, or it may be that they're a service provider, like say a JLL or a CBRE, that put in facilities services on behalf of a client. Those are the operators, and then the other tier is the owners of space. And there has historically been, this is the kind of real estate holdings companies and pension funds, etc. Historically, there's been a bit of disconnect when it comes to things like PropTech, because it's called the agency problem. And basically how it goes is if you've got an old building, the measures to improve, say, ESG ratings in that building will require investment from the owner of the building. The savings generated go to the tenant of the building. So the easiest to understand is energy savings. If I go and put in double glazing or LED lighting or something like that, it brings down the energy bills. But I, as the landlord, am probably not paying those energy bills, my tenant is. So there's been this kind of natural disincentive to move. ESG as a whole concept is changing that. Because a high ESG score, as you say, will lead to a higher yield. And actually, it can be life and death for an asset. I was talking to the chairman of a property holding fund that has hundreds of billions under management recently. He said, I think it's even more stark than you'll have kind of good, bad, and terrible. You will have ESG, well-rated ESG buildings, and you will have land. And that's basically how he sees it. But the point is, you don't need to tear down old stock and rebuild it to modernize them. You can retrofit, and you can achieve a huge amount with that. And in fact, that often is far more cost and environmentally effective than a tear down and rebuild. If you go back to sort of what I mentioned about meta use cases, well, let's take energy efficiency, for example. You may realize as a building, once you have enough data, that you are losing a lot of heat through the winter in your building. And because of that lot of heat, that draft, you are experiencing very high energy bills, which in turn has a big carbon impact. But if you really have good quality granular data, you can understand, well, actually, but I'm losing almost all of that heat through the westerly wall, for example. So I can go and double glaze or insulate that one particular part of the building, and therefore only sort of 25% of the cost that it might have been if I'd have gone in blind, and achieve 80% of the result. And I think when we look at the size of the challenge that we've got in terms of modernizing building stock, because the vast majority of our buildings are, over a decade or many decades old, the investment funding is not there to do it all at once. And so getting smarter about how you do this with simple retrofit, data collection, and then going from there is really important.
I think that actually speaks to something that's quite important as well, which is one of the things I've heard from speaking to clients is, look, some of this technology is great, but it moves kind of so quickly that if I'm building a new building or if I'm doing a refit, what's the approach do you take? Because if you try to integrate something at the start of the project, by the time you get to the end of it, it's already outdated and you kind of technology's moved on. This sort of approach, being able to kind of retrofit things, presumably also gives you a bit of flexibility around that, in that, we've got a new type of sensor or a new way of looking at things, we can upgrade that on the fly rather than after a 5-year development program.
So Will, thanks, that's really interesting. Can I just drill down slightly into some of that by asking, I would imagine it varies across sectors, but is there a particular bucket of data that you are seeing particular interest in at the moment? Is it around sanitation, and how do you see that developing as we go forward post-pandemic?
Yeah, so definitely we do. So for the office environment, there are, broadly speaking, 4 buckets that are seeing the greatest growth, really phenomenal growth amongst our clients in interest and so forth. And 3 of those are sort of pretty front of house, I would say, and one of those is quite under the surface. So the first, which ties intimately into pretty much all of the others, is occupancy. So this is everything from how many people are coming in and out of the building as a whole, then which particular floor or part of the building are they going to, down to which individual desk or asset are they sat at. What's really important with that is that it can create some unease amongst employees, that they feel like that they're being tracked or monitored from a, how long are you working perspective. That is absolutely not the intention. And so it's very clearly mitigated for by us and our clients in deployment. So what people are trying to understand is how a space is being used so they can better optimize it or better clean it. And I'll come on to smart cleaning as one of the other pillars shortly. That is not about tracking somebody's loo breaks or coffee breaks or how long they were at the desk. So typically no personal data at all is involved. You're using things like laser time of flight to count footfall in and out of a building, and a temperature sensor to understand whether somebody's sat at a desk. Then you can set the parameters in terms of how frequently this is being captured. So for example, if you say, I just want to check in every 5 or 10 minutes to see whether the asset is in use, that will give you useful blocks of time where you can understand utilization without having people feel like they are constantly being tracked. So that is one of the core trends, and that links to the sort of level of real estate that people, our corporate clients take on, how they use it, whether they switch to more flexible spaces, etc. The second, which I alluded to just there, is what we would call smart cleaning. So this again ties to utilization. So this will then be, for example, how many people are using a bathroom or a restroom, correlated with how are people feeling about the cleanliness of that bathroom, the sentiment. So for example, is this bathroom needing a clean? Has it run out of paper towels or soap? Once you start to correlate those 2 data points together, you can start to get an understanding that says, okay, once the bathroom hits 50 uses, that's when I start to see a spike in negative sentiment. So I need to get out ahead of that. I need to send my cleaner to be there at 45 uses, which means that when I've detected the 40th use, I'm going to send a simple alert, either through a workflow tool or even just an SMS to that cleaner to go and start servicing that bathroom so that they preempt a problem before anybody else reports it. And then that goes out to the entire office space. So, in a post-COVID world, people are incredibly conscious of cleanliness and sanitation, particularly if you're looking at using kind of hot desks or meeting rooms and conference in very high demand after somebody else. They may want that to be sanitized in between uses or definitely heavily sanitized at the end of each day. So by understanding which desk is being used, which rooms are being used and how heavily, you can then move to a smart cleaning model where somebody goes through and only cleans the assets that need to be cleaned. And so when we're talking about sitting with social distancing, for example, which is likely to stay for at least the rest of this year, that can be quite significant, because if you've only got 50% of the desks on a floor actually being used, then your cleaner can go and spend twice as long cleaning them if they know which ones are actually being used, and give them a much deeper level of clean. Whereas otherwise they wouldn't have known, and then they would have gone in blind and just given a superficial clean to every single one of those desks. And the last tier to this is that you can actually validate passively using sensors that clean is taking place and taking place to a good enough quality. So through Infogrid, you can, for example, detect where the surfaces have been wiped down, where the floors have been mopped, whether the vacuum has been used, even down to whether or not fresh hot water was used in the process of that mopping, passively. And so you can then create a scorecard at the end of each day saying, okay, to what quality was my office cleaned last night? And if that is below a kind of acceptable threshold, then perhaps retraining or re-education to that staff needs to occur in terms of what they need to do. So that's the second tier, smart cleaning. The third, which will be familiar to everybody now in a way that it wasn't a year ago, is air quality. And so this is everybody becoming fundamentally aware, having been wearing a face mask all year, just how important the air that we breathe in is for us. And so, yes, this is clearly linked to virus risk, and one of the tools we actually provide through Infogrid is a virus risk score. It draws on a number of different metadata points to give an indicative understanding of how long a virus might be lingering in the air, for example. But it goes beyond that. Whether it's air particulates at PM1, 2.5, or 10, which are linked to a range of different long-term kind of respiratory diseases. Things like CO2, where sort of increased levels of CO2 can drastically reduce the ability to concentrate or focus. And other things like poor humidity and temperature that can lead to increased rates of sickness amongst staff. Taking control of this is really important when we're bringing those people back into their spaces and having them collaborate, as you say. We also want to make sure we keep them healthy. So when you pull those three together, they give a very, very powerful set of insights, because you're now knowing how many people are in the building, what sort of parts of the building they're using, how that's being cleaned and how well, and then also how the air they're breathing is. And you can also track things like their sentiment about that. Very easy through simple feedback buttons like the one I showed you earlier, which can then be mounted into different panels to understand very quickly how people feel about the lighting or the noise or the air quality of a space, and then adjust if the sentiments are. And the fourth use case that we're seeing very widely deployed, but that most people may never know is even a thing, is what's called Legionnaire's disease, or water pipe monitoring. So Legionnaire's disease is a waterborne disease that thrives in stagnant, tepid water. And so what you need to do, and every building in the Western world is regulated to some degree around this, is you need to make sure that the water in your system is regularly flowing at right temperature. So broadly speaking, that's below 18 degrees or above 48 degrees. And so whether you know it or not, this is happening in every single one of your offices. Somebody, potentially from an external service provider or internal to your company, is going around and forming a bunch of checks around it. The thing is that they're usually done manually, and they're usually done once a month. Really low quality of data, and it's very labor intensive. So with the setup that I showed earlier, putting something on a pipe like this, you actually are getting data every minute about what's happening in that pipe in terms of whether water's flowing, whether or not it's at the right temperatures. And you can then take corrective action if something's going wrong much sooner. But bringing it back to the sort of health of the office environment, we don't really fully understand yet as a species the longer term effects of COVID on our susceptibility to respiratory illness. Legionnaire's disease is a respiratory illness that's spread through water droplets, so aerosol water. And so it's a secondary risk factor that suddenly we're seeing people get very, very interested in. They've always been taking it seriously, but much more so. So those are sort of four big use cases. There are many more, whether it's security, whether it's one-touch feedback, etc. But certainly those are the most prevalent that we're seeing being deployed today, and usually in conjunction with one another.
Cool. I mean, it's fascinating kind of range of different data points that you can kind of gather with some, so as you say, of kind of some fairly simple sensors that at the outset seem kind of to gather not very much. But in terms of kind of then using that across the industry, because I could see investors and things being interested in what's the performance like in this building versus another building, and kind of using that to help investment decisions. Do you think there's kind of enough standardization of data in the kind of real estate market, and is that sort of holding things back at all, or if not?
I think we have a few kind of trailblazers, some of which are sort of really gathering a lot of speed recently. So you do have, for example, certification standards, things like WELL, FitWell, Reset, around healthy sort of standards for getting a building healthy, and they are gathering pace. There have been for quite a while standards around energy efficiency as well. So you talking about things like LEED or BREEAM. What there isn't at the moment is homogeneity around the capture and use of real-time data to drive action, and that is what Infogrid are doing. The short answer would be not yet, but watch this space.
And can I just ask, coming off that, do you think that offices accepting that there will be more worker choice? Do you think that offices are going to use tech to bridge the gap, to break down the interaction, break down the divide between the office and working from home or other working environments?
Yeah, I think they're going to have to. I think as people come back to the office, they're willing and in some senses excited to, but their expectations are fundamentally going to be higher and different than they were before. They are going to expect that you're sort of much more proactively looking out for their wellness in that space. They're going to tolerate far fewer kind of grotty or dingy or unpleasant or serried office spaces, and it's increasingly just a point of competition for talent. We literally have a client for whom I've spoken about this with whom I've spoken about this many times, who has said, look, we can't compete with some of the tech giants, say, on salary. So we have to absolutely nail everything else in terms of working experience, culture, office setup, etc. And yeah, I think that is going to be a fundamental kind of arrow in the quiver of attracting and retaining good quality talent, and also getting the most out of it, making people feel healthy and happy, so that they are their most creative, collaborative, and productive.
Great. Well, Will, look, thank you for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, and I think it's certainly going to be a different experience looking to the future in the office. So thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.